This is the land of Havilah, Exodus 14. Israel's on the move in the desert. Verse 1. Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to the children of Israel that they turn back and encamp before Pihahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, before Baal-zephon. You shall encamp opposite it by the sea. Comment: Yahweh instructed Israel to camp at a certain location by the Red Sea. The location's obscure, though some believe they've located it. It's either by what we now call the Gulf of Suez or the Gulf of Aqaba, both of them being arms of the Red Sea. Coming up by Yahweh placing Israel here, trapping them against the sea, he'll entice Pharaoh to attack. Yahweh explains his tactics to Moses, verse 3. Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they're entangled in the land, the wilderness has shut them in. I'll harden Pharaoh's heart, and he'll follow after them, and I'll get honor over Pharaoh and over all his armies, and the Egyptians shall know that I am Yahweh. They did so. Comment: Israel camped by the sea like Yahweh told them. Verse 5. The king of Egypt was told that the people had fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was changed toward the people, and they said, What is this that we've done, that we've let Israel go from serving us? Comment: After 10 plagues, it's amazing anybody thinks it's a good idea to give chase. But in verse 4, God said, I will harden Pharaoh's heart, and he will follow after them. End quote. He's using the hardening to bring honor to himself, he says. Though men dishonor God, God will overtake them and be honored forever. Revelation 7:12. Verse 6. He prepared his chariot and took his army with him, and he took 600 chosen chariots and all the chariots of Egypt and captains over all of them. Comment: Since the time of the 5th plague, when all the Egyptian livestock died, the Egyptians have had time to get more horses, probably by foreign trade. The Israelites' livestock didn't die during the plague, but the Egyptians probably didn't get their horses from them. There's no mention of the Israelites ever having any horses until they became rich in the Promised Land. Verse 8. Yahweh hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued the children of Israel, for the children of Israel went out with a high hand. Comment: Israel went out with a high hand, meaning they were bold and confident. But how quickly that will change. Verse 9. The Egyptians pursued them. All the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, his horsemen, and his army overtook them, encamping by the sea beside Pihahiroth before Baal-zephon. When Pharaoh came near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them, and they were very afraid. The children of Israel cried out to Yahweh. Comment: Israel went from bold to panicky that fast. Yahweh said to remember his mighty hand continually, but in just days they've forgotten it. They should remember, as he just told them in the last 2 chapters. Verse 11. They said to Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, have you taken us away to die in the wilderness? Why have you treated us this way to bring us out of Egypt? Isn't this the word that we spoke to you in Egypt, saying, Leave us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness. Comment: We drop our jaws how quickly they forget, how ugly they are when they lose faith, and how quickly they go from belief to unbelief, on and off like a light switch with no stability. But we're made of the same stuff they were. We should remember what God has done and what he can do. Verse 13. Moses said to the people, Don't be afraid. Stand still and see the salvation of Yahweh, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you shall never see them again. Yahweh will fight for you, and you shall be still. Comment: Sometimes we're in a situation that disaster is sure unless God shows up. Verse 15. Yahweh said to Moses, Why do you cry to me? Speak to the children of Israel that they go forward. Comment: Even Moses is getting panicky, crying out, quote, Why do you cry to me? End quote. It's reminiscent of the rebuke Jesus gave his disciples when they were in the storm at sea. Quote, Why are you fearful, O you of little faith? Matthew 8:26. We should stay calm and pray. We shouldn't act like God's asleep and needs to be waked up. Yahweh says, verse 16, Lift up your rod and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go into the middle of the sea on dry ground. Behold, I myself will harden the hearts of the Egyptians, and they shall go in after them, and I'll get myself honor over Pharaoh and over all his armies, over his chariots and over his horsemen. The Egyptians shall know that I am Yahweh when I've gotten myself honor over Pharaoh, over his chariots and over his horsemen. The angel of God who went before the camp of Israel moved and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud moved from before them and stood behind them. Comment, there's no need for the pillar to be in front showing the way because Moses knows the way. The way is through the sea on the dry ground, as Yahweh said in verse 16. When the pillar first appeared in the last chapter, it was said Yahweh was in the pillar, Genesis 13:21. The pillar didn't confine Yahweh, of course, but he was in it. It was a sign to Israel. In verse 19, the angel of God, which is Yahweh, moved to a defensive position between Israel and Pharaoh, as indicated by the moving of the pillar. Speaking of the pillar, verse 20, it came between the camp of Egypt and the camp of Israel, and there was the cloud and the darkness, yet gave it light by night, and one didn't come near the other all night. Comment, the pillar was dark, meaning it provided a visual barrier, but though it was dark, it gave light. Also, there was something about it that prevented the Egyptians from attacking. It appeared to be protective, and it was protective, and reassuring. We should be assured that God is with us. Coming up, one of the most famous images of the Bible, and probably the most amazing and blatant display of God's power to man there ever was. Verse 21, Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and Yahweh caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. The children of Israel went into the middle of the sea on the dry ground, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Comment, this wasn't just an ordinary case of wind blowing water off a shallow area. There was a wall of water on the left and right. Israel went through the sea on dry land. Then, verse 23, the Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the middle of the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. In the morning watch, Yahweh looked out on the Egyptian army through the pillar of fire and of cloud, and confused the Egyptian army. He took off their chariot wheels, and they drove them heavily, so that the Egyptians said, Let's flee from the face of Israel, for Yahweh fights for them against the Egyptians. Comment, the chariot wheels fell off. Pharaoh's army can't make a quick exit. Verse 26. Yahweh said to Moses, Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the waters may come again on the Egyptians, on their chariots, and on their horsemen. Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared, and the Egyptians fled against it. Yahweh overthrew the Egyptians in the middle of the sea. Comment, it says the sea returned to its strength when the morning appeared. In other words, the sea closed back in. For Israel to get 2 million or more across, they must have been crossing for the better part of the night, but morning had appeared when the waters closed on the Egyptians, which meant the Israelites could see what happened. Verse 28. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen, even all Pharaoh's army that went in after them into the sea. There remained not so much as one of them. But the children of Israel walked on dry land in the middle of the sea, and the waters were a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Comment, to verify that this wasn't a shallow water event, when the walls of water closed, it was enough to drown Pharaoh and his army. Verse 30. Thus Yahweh saved Israel that day out of the hand of the Egyptians, and Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great work which Yahweh did to the Egyptians, and the people feared Yahweh, and they believed in Yahweh and in his servant Moses. Comment, Psalm 37:34, quote, When the wicked are cut off, you will see it, end quote. Ezekiel 33:11, God says, quote, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live, end quote. God gave the Egyptians 400 years, then he gave them 10 warning plagues and 10 chances. There were blood, frogs, lice, flies, death of the livestock, boils, lethal hail, locusts, darkness, the death of the firstborn, which is 10, then death in the Red Sea. No man or god of Egypt could stop it. Quote, His hand is stretched out, and who can turn it back? Isaiah 14:27. Exodus 15 is next at landofhavilah.net. Exodus 15. This is the map of Exodus 14. This is the Red Sea. It has two arms, the Gulf of Suez here and Gulf of Aqaba here. There's argument about which arm Israel crossed. If they crossed the Gulf of Suez, then Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai are probably on the Sinai Peninsula in the traditionally recognized location here. If they crossed the Gulf of Aqaba, then Mount Horeb and Mount Sinai are probably on the northwestern corner of the Arabian Peninsula. All the wilderness locations in coming chapters are obscure unless we point them out. Exodus 15 is next.